Welcome to Families for Life with Brian and Brian, a podcast of Oak Hill Baptist Church.
On today's episode, we'll be talking through examples of the nature of friendships. All right, and we are back talking about friendships again today. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Yeah, I'm excited to kind of move forward in our friendship series. We've been working on that for a little bit now, and it's been good so far. I really enjoyed talking about it. So last episode, if you didn't get a chance, we talked through a lot of it was like the theology maybe behind friendship.
Yeah.
It was a lot of biblical examples of friendship. So
Yeah.
I thought that was good.
Yeah, today will be a little bit different, but it's funny. I feel like we've been doing this series for a really long time.
Yeah, it does feel that way.
But, we only had 2 episodes on it
yeah.
yet. I think that's just because we've had to take breaks and do different things and, sickness and stuff like that.
Well, hopefully you don't get tired of it. Stick with us.
Yes.
We've got a couple more episodes planned. We'll sprinkle in some other things throughout so it doesn't get too doesn't feel stale.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But hopefully talking about friendships is encouraging and helpful. So that's, this is, and I'll be honest, this episode was pretty hard and to talk through because, finding real life examples of like true deep friendship is not actually that easy. It's pretty difficult. And to understand the nature of those friendships and what's kind of common through those different examples, it takes some looking into.
Well, you're talking about well-known people, well-known examples.
Right.
There's probably lots of personal examples that people could point to.
Sure.
But
ones that everyone would be able to say, "Oh, I know who that person is."
Right.
That's kind of hard because a lot of times the popular. I even looked up like famous friendships, and it's really funny.
Matt Damon and Ben Affleck.
It is that. It's that stuff. That's exactly what it is. And you're like, I know the story behind those guys. They're not good friends. Maybe those guys are. I don't know, but a lot of those famous ones aren't. So this was kind of hard. But yeah, one of the things we're doing is talking through some of these kind of historical examples of friendship. But that's not the main point. We're not trying to just do like a history lesson on this stuff, right?
No, we really want some practical things. I like what you've drawn out here of some of essential qualities in what a good friendship. You look at examples in life, and then you can kind of pull out different themes or different qualities that will help to sort of define what that looks like. And then some of those things can be brought over into your life and to your friendships. And you can see where that,
Yeah, that's exactly the hope behind this. And I almost even scrapped this episode because it was just like, I don't want to just talk about historical figures just because. But then as I was looking, I found, and really the help of C.S. Lewis in The Four Loves, that was a real big help. And I actually, you look up on YouTube, there's some really good resources there. There's a thing called C.S. Lewis Doodles, and it's a guy who illustrates while the books, the literature of C.S. Lewis is read. And The Four Loves on friendship, I listened through that. It was really helpful. But it's funny, there's these kind of things that flow in friendship, and Lewis draws out that the soil to friendship is companionship. You're not going to become friends with somebody that you aren't at least first companions with. If you're never around the person, you don't have any points of contact, you're not going to be friends.
Sure. We've talked about that. Proximity, time, those type of things have to be spent together to develop a friendship.
And so companionship is the first quality that we're going to see in all of these things. The next is commonality. These friendships, all these people all had something in common with one another, and they developed their friendships through those commonalities.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean to say that that the person that you're friends with has to have everything in common with you.
Exactly.
But there has to be something that draws you together, or something that's in common. I think that's important to understand. Like, you can be different people that like different things or that have different personalities. In fact, sometimes, opposites attract in these types of relationships too.
Yes, that's a huge aspect, and I hope we'll see that as we look at these examples. But then you find that in order for the friendship to become this deep, the type of friendship we're talking about, there's this confidence that you have with one another, this trust where you open yourself up and you bare your soul to this person. And then you also allow this person to interact with that. They critique you and you critique them. And it's an encouraging it's a building critique, but it's still something where you let that person affect you and change you.
Yeah, I think people's circle of friendship gets really small when you get to that
Yes.
area, because people don't like that from just anybody. You have to be really close to the person to receive that helpful critique in your life.
Well, and that's why it's almost like a progression of these things. And then finally there's the continuation, it's either going to keep going or it's going to fade. And we'll see in some examples how that kind of played out.
Right. So you have companionship, commonality, confidence, critique, and continuation.
That's right.
So you made them all C words.
I
You
honestly,
had to alliterate
I
that.
didn't even mean to. It just happened. I was working on this a long time, and then all of a sudden I was like, "Aha! Here it is!"
Brian has the heart of an old school pastor that wants to alliterate everything. Even now, you didn't do it here, but I've seen some pretty crazy alliterations to make it make
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
And then the words we never use ever.
I know. Yeah.
These words, they're just the craziest
Let me
defined
explain
words.
what this word means based
Right.
on its etymology, just so it works in my outline.
Yeah.
No, that's hopefully not what we did here. But what I was doing, when I thought through, we used our resource. How should we develop biblical friendship by Haken and Beakey? I was looking at that, and we've got a couple examples from them. But then thinking through history, I wanted to see some other historical figures that we can look to see. Are these things really there? Are these qualities really there in friendship? And so I looked at a couple of unbelievers, people before the time of Christ, back in the ancient world. The first is Alexander the Great and his friend Hephaestion. I think that's how you say it. And so
Sounds good to me. Just say it with confidence.
yeah, that's right. Well, I botched that. But they lived in the 300s BC. Most everybody knows Alexander the Great, but Hephaestion is not really somebody that you know very well. But these guys were inseparable best friends. And so really quickly, they had companionship because they trained together under Aristotle. They were in school together, essentially. And in school, they forged this bond of commonality, their common interest over philosophy and especially military training, and their own personal thoughts. So, we don't really know what was common between them because it was between them. They shared their thoughts to each other, not to the rest of the world, but they found this commonality. And Aristotle even is quoted to describe their friendship as one soul abiding in two bodies. So these guys were absolutely inseparable. And so they had confidence in each other. And Alexander the Great said that by far the dearest of all the king's friends, well, it was said of him that all of the king's friends, Hephaestion had been brought up with Alexander and shared all his secrets. And that to me is one of the things we're going to see over and over and over again in these friendships, is that these close friendships share their secrets. And so these are real quotes of this historical friendship. And there's this one scene. This is a fun scene. They're conquering. So Hephaestion and Alexander the Great have just gotten done destroying, I think it was Darius the Third's army they were conquering, and Darius the Third's mother was there. And she came and she thought Hephaestion was Alexander because he looked more kingly than Alexander did. And so she throws herself on the ground and she's begging for her life and stuff. And the guys basically laugh at her and say, "Hey, lady, calm down. I'm Alexander." And she's super embarrassed. But Alexander then says to her, "You were not mistaken, mother. This man too is Alexander." And so you just see this really deep love for one another that flowed over into critique. Hephaestion was the guy who Alexander asked for, counsel. I mean, he was the second in command. And when Hephaestion died suddenly, Alexander was just crippled. He was just basically done. And funnily enough, 8 months later he died, and those were not necessarily related. But I do think it's interesting that Alexander only lived 8 months without his best friend. And so there's this desire for continuation that when he died, he was distraught.
Sure. Is there anything that we can draw from that relationship, or that we can sort of bring over into our own friendships?
So first thing I want us to see is that these guys were in school together, right? So this stuff gets like really rubber meets the road when you think about the people that you're around. Because sometimes we want to like curate our own friends. We want to make our friend. We think we have this idea of who my friend is supposed to be. But what we need to be doing is looking at the people who are around us.
Yeah, it's interesting, when you have somebody that just it's not happenstance, but it feels like happenstance. God is ordained and is sovereign over all the events of our life, but it feels like happenstance, like you just happen to meet this person one day, and then through a series of events, you become friends with them. And it's like, I would never have, like, if I had a bunch of people lined up, I would never pick that person,
Right.
but they just become your friend because you just form this bond that seems it's almost spiritual in a sense,
It really is, and it's funny how that even exists for these unbelievers. But the next examples that we're going to look at from history are all Christians, all believers. And as you read, we're not going to be able to show this very clearly here, but if you ever read any works or biographies on these people, you'll see the depth of their friendship. I think I do think it was deeper, but I think that there's this commonality in friendships, even through with unbelievers. So these next two guys are Gregory of Nazianzus and Basil the Great. Okay. These guys were fellow bishops. They lived in the 4th century AD, so 300s AD. And they are two of the 3 bishops that are called the Cappadocian Fathers. So these are really important figures in church history. They're known for lots of stuff, but especially their defense of the doctrine of the Trinity. So they and like Augustine, all these guys knew each other and wrote with one another and really debated and talked through the doctrine of the Trinity. Here's a great quote from our resource regarding commonality. One of the things that Gregory says of Basil, he says, "In studies, in lodgings, in discussions, I had him as a companion. We had all things in common. But above all, it was God, of course, and a mutual desire for higher things that drew us to each other." As far as confidence, he also says, "As a result, we reached such a high pitch of confidence that we revealed the depths of our hearts, becoming ever more united in our yearning." And so that is interesting that here we have these examples of friendship, and in them there are quotes regarding their oneness of heart, and their ability to reveal their deepest thoughts to one another.
Yeah, this is important. I think one of the big takeaways from a friendship like this is the values, core values have to be similar.
Yep.
I'm not saying that everything has to line up, but it's hard to be friends with someone when the core values, especially for the Christian, it's hard to find encouragement to Christ and to be, just encouraged in your theology and in your faith without someone that's like-minded. Once again, I don't think everything has to be, but I think some of those core tenets have to be there.
That's good. I'm glad you said that because you're right. I think that's the hammer hitting the nail on the head. Like the commonality that we're talking about isn't just, they like tea, like it's not only that. Those things help to build the friendship, but at the root of it, it's your core beliefs, and are those things lining up together?
Right.
Because then, they have this critique where, they're different people, and they're like, "Hey, I think you're wrong about this," know? But it's because of their common core beliefs that they're able to really enjoy that friendship and grow through that critique. And so, they continued on. One of them died before the other, and it was just in every one of these examples, the feeling of loss is described as though they lost, the closest person in their life. And so, they're not family members, but it sounds like a family member just died. And so I think that's really important to recognize. Next examples, John Calvin. Here's an interesting thing. These are 3 people. So friendships are not only between 2 people, and C.S. Lewis talks a lot about that. Friendship is not only just 2 people. In fact, it usually desires more.
Could be a group.
And so Calvin and
Like
Gilliam,
the Friends.
Yeah,
from
exactly.
the TV show Friends.
That was when I looked up, I could not stop finding things about Friends. I was like, I'm not
Friends, the TV
the
show.
TV show. Like I'm not trying to find out more about Joey. Come on. Like so John Calvin, Guillaume Farel or William Farel, and Pierre Viret in the 1500s. They were reformers. They worked together in ministry. And it's funny, Farel is actually the guy who called Viret to ministry and even convinced Calvin to join him in Geneva. So Farel's kind of the guy pulling these 3 together. But then Calvin is the one who really generates this awesome friendship between them. And so they had this commonality of theological ideas and just working to reform the church. And here's a great quote about their confidence they had in one another. It says, this is Calvin. He says, I do not believe that there have ever been such friends who have lived together in such a deep friendship in their everyday style of life in this world as we have had in our ministry. I have served here in the office of pastor with you 2. There is never any appearance of envy. It seems to me that you 2 and I were as one person. So here's another quote saying what we've already heard. We're the same. We're the same person.
Yeah.
In their critique, I mean, they just helped each other hone their skills in preaching. And Calvin even has a letter where he writes to Farel and he says, hey, I've been hearing your sermons are too long. Shorten them. He tells them.
Yeah.
It tells them, fix this.
Well, I think it's interesting, when you have these type of when you have a type of friendship that is a godly biblical friendship, it's going to help you to grow in your faith, but also to just help you grow as a person.
Yes.
One of the things that that we know about Calvin is he did not desire a position of leadership.
Right.
He wanted to be left alone to write and just to study. But God placed certain people in his life, and I'm sure these friends are a part of
Farel
that.
is that guy. Yeah.
that pushed him to fulfill God's mission and God's calling. Yeah. And if you have friendships that are trying to keep you from fulfilling what God has called you to do, then it's not a true friendship. A true friendship, someone's going to push you and encourage you to keep pressing forward with what God has called you to do.
That's huge, and that's that idea of critique. It's not literal criticism. It's really pushing and encouraging and helping. It's iron sharpening iron.
Right.
And that always happens.
So we have so many toxic friendships because people are not doing things like this. We don't want what's best for the people.
The other person.
Right.
We want what's best for me.
Right.
Yeah. And that's not what we're talking. That's not what godly friendships are. And so listen to this, their continuation. They didn't stay all together. They were ministering in different areas. They didn't have, they didn't have the ability to just text each other instantly. So they had to write letters. There are 163 surviving letters from Calvin to Farel and 137 letters from Farel to Calvin. There's 204 letters from Calvin to Viret and 185 letters from Viret to Calvin. So these are not little text messages. These are letters, that took them a long time to write. Think about the amount of time that had to go into keeping those relationships alive. I think that is what we see here is they spent the time it took to keep those friendships alive.
Well, and I think if you develop a friendship with someone, then there's a distance or a time, it's the way it's a good friendship is when you can just kind of fall right back into that friendship, even though you've been away for months or years. That's
absolutely, and Lewis talks about that in the Four Loves, and his point is if your friendship is only based on the external things, then when you come back to each other after a long time apart, you're not going to have anything in common anymore.
Right.
But if your friendship is based on the person, the person being who he is and the other and you being who you are, then you come back and it doesn't matter what is different in your life because you're all about that person, not those simple things.
Right.
And so here's an interesting one though, and this is more of a modern look at some modern, people. They're from the 20th century, and I've said a lot about Lewis. We talk about these guys a lot because they're so influential. And as I was reading Lewis, I just thought, let's think about C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. They were really, really close friends, but their friendship is a really good look because it's more complicated. It's there's actually some messiness to their friendship, which I did not know until I was looking into it. But first, they met at Oxford. They were both professors there eventually, and they had similar life experiences. They both lost parents at young ages. They both fought through World War I. They had a lot of the same interests. They loved language and literature and all these other things. And eventually, through Tolkien's leading, Jesus was their commonality, right? They had confidence in one another. Tolkien once wrote, he said, "The unpayable debt that I owe to him was not influence, but sheer encouragement. He was for a long time my only audience." And so Tolkien loved Lewis, and Lewis loved Tolkien. They had this group called the Inklings, and those are, this is a group of people who all had these close friendships, and they shared their literary works. I mean, so they're pouring out these things that they haven't shown anyone else. And they are then able to critique one another. And so they had this trust. They were able to sharpen one another. And Lewis and Tolkien actually helped each other in their publishing. Lewis was constantly pushing Tolkien like, hey, finish your book, finish The Lord of the Rings and get it published, get it out there. If it weren't for Lewis pushing him, it might not have happened. And Tolkien, on the other side, he helped connect Lewis to different publishers for his for one of his science fiction novels. So these things wouldn't have happened if it weren't for these friendships pushing each other. But here's where it gets messy. As Lewis, Lewis actually became more famous than Tolkien. And as this started happening, and as they're writing,
as they're in their current time,
yes, in their current time. Nowadays, I think people know Tolkien more than Lewis.
Probably.
But at the time, Lewis was more famous than Tolkien. And they had different writing styles. Lewis was allegory, and Tolkien was not. And they didn't like the other person's writing style. And so they came to the place where eventually they were not both at Oxford anymore. There was distance. They had disagreements, and ultimately the time. They just didn't have the time, and so their friendship faded. But here's the thing about that continuation and the way we feel about these deep friendships. What Tolkien said when Lewis died, he said that it felt to him as though an axe had hit. It was an axe blow at the root of the tree. And so for Tolkien, the death of Lewis, even though they were not close at that time, because of their deep friendship, it felt like he had been just struck at the roots. And so we see how deeply these friendships affect us. It's almost like we have died ourselves.
Yeah, and I think there's a good lesson here for Christians, as we are in the world at our places of business or, at our kids' ball teams or whatever, that we can develop friendships even with non-believers as long as we keep our Christian identity.
Right. Yes.
We need to be hopefully the ones influencing them and not vice versa. They were drawn together because of their profession and encouraging each other.
Lewis was not a believer yet. Yeah.
Right. And so I want to be clear that, Christians don't only have to be friends with Christians. Right. Now, we need to have Christian relationships that encourage us and spur us on. We've talked a lot about that.
Right.
But you can develop great, deep friendships with non-believers as long as they respect and understand what you believe and why you believe that. And there's an opportunity for you to maintain your Christian identity. They're not trying to, they're not trying to pull you away from that. you know?
Yeah, they're not hostile.
And
to
really
it.
vice versa. You respect their identity as well.
That's right.
You know, while sharing the truth of the gospel, you're not trying to necessarily convince them of anything. You're putting it out there so that they can hear that truth. And if God would call out to them, and as he did to C.S. Lewis, then they may respond to that, you know?
Yeah, and I think, that's right. It's like, it's not like we are trying to convince them because we love them, but we're not trying to force anything because we love them.
It's not like our friendship is contingent on
them thinking the way we do.
Right.
Because then we're just trying to make a yes man who just makes us feel better about ourselves.
Right.
And again, that's not what friendship is
about. It's so much
about.
better for somebody to come to Christ in their own way than me trying to like convince them and trying to like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, almost manipulate them, right? And I've seen that. I mean, it's honestly, it can be kind of tempting because you can say some of the words, some of the things to scare people into praying a prayer, but that's not really what we want for our friends.
Right.
We don't want to manipulate them into loving Jesus because that's not genuine love.
Right.
So that was a great example from them. You know, Tolkien and Lewis, they spent hours and hours and hours talking about these things. But here's the thing. Here's what we need to, I think, come away with, right? There's just a few things that we need to see from these examples is that when we look at our friendships, the people that we spend time with, we need to see if we have friends that have these qualities. Like, look, think about in your friendships, are these people that you share your secrets with? Like, is this somebody that you could pour your soul out to? Is this somebody who can say hard things to you and critique you, Because if those friendships are not to that level, then you probably are still at the level of companionship and probably commonality. And so if you're looking at that and you do have friends that you share your soul with and who do critique you, invest in those friendships. Like, don't recognize this person is one of my best friends. Recognize that and invest in them. Don't let that go. Make sure you are like Calvin. You're writing the letters. You're the one texting. I've got a friend who calls me all the time. And if it weren't for him, just being that good friend, I don't know where we'd be. And so that's really important. But if you don't have those, well, then look at the people that you do have commonality with and maybe try to spend more time with them. See if maybe this could be a friendship in the making, And I think a lot of times we want to make friends without knowing how friendship is made.
Right.
And so I'm excited because the next 3 episodes are really going to be all about making friends, right? And how to deal with problems in friendships, practical steps you need to take. I mean, literally, like just what do I do? Step 1 to make a friend. We're going to be talking all about those. And so far we've kind of just laid the groundwork for what friendship is, the biblical understanding of friendship and real life examples of friendship today. And then we're going to get into how we can do it where the rubber meets the road. So
practical examples.
That's right. That's right. So this was, hopefully a helpful episode. I hope you see those different qualities of companionship, commonality, confidence, critique, and continuation. And I hope that you have that in your life. And if you don't, pray and ask the Lord to show you who those people could be. And then you go after them. You be the friend. What do you think?
That's good. Yep. I like it.
Cool. All right. Well, listeners, thanks for hanging with us. And we've got some other stuff that we are working on. And so we're pretty excited about it.
Yes. You got any comments or questions, please email us f4l@oakhillbc.org. You can also comment, let us know your feedback. And we'd love to hear from you.
That's right. So, thank you for listening. And
we'll see you next time.